There's a moment a lot of people have, usually sometime in their 30s, where they stop and do the math. Not just the numbers, but the whole picture. They look at how hard they work, how carefully they've tried to do everything right, and they realize something quiet and unsettling. It doesn't quite add up. Maybe you felt it too. You're not lazy. You never were. You did what you were told. Stay in school, work hard, be reliable, show up. And you did all of it. But somewhere along the way, a gap opened up between the effort you're putting in and the security you thought that effort would produce. Not a gap you can close by working harder. A different kind of gap. A structural one. That's what I want to talk about today. Not to depress you, and not to make you feel like a victim of some conspiracy, but because I think understanding what's actually happening is the beginning of building something real. And right now, a lot of people are working incredibly hard while using a map that was drawn for a different era. For most of the 20th century, the deal was fairly straightforward. You showed up, you worked, and over time, the economy rewarded that consistently. Real wages rose alongside productivity. Housing stayed within reach of a median income. A pension waited at the end. You didn't have to be financially sophisticated. You didn't have to understand asset classes, or compound growth, or inflation-adjusted returns. You just had to work. That deal made a certain kind of psychology feel completely rational. The psychology that says, if I work hard enough, long enough, I'll be okay. And for a while, for a generation or two, that was largely true. But something started shifting in the 1970s and accelerated through the 80s and 90s, quietly, without much announcement. Productivity kept climbing. Wages didn't climb with it, not at the same pace. The labor movement weakened. Pension systems gave way to individual retirement accounts that placed the burden of financial planning squarely on the individual. Globalization restructured which jobs paid well and which didn't. And asset prices, stocks, real estate, anything you could own, started outpacing the growth in what most people earned from working. The economist Emmanuel Saez has tracked this for decades. What the data shows is striking. The share of income growth captured by the top 1% has increasingly concentrated at the asset-owning class, while workers capturing less of the productivity gains they help create. That's not a moral judgment. It's just the shape of the modern economy. And if you're building your financial life primarily through labor income, you're operating in the weaker current. Here's where it gets psychological, though, because the hard part isn't just economic. It's that we haven't updated our intuitions to match the new reality. When something works for decades, when an entire generation watches their parents build stability through diligence, it becomes more than a strategy. It becomes a belief, almost a moral conviction. Hard work equals reward. That's not just economics, that's identity. And when that belief starts failing people quietly, when someone does everything right and still finds themselves stretched thin, still can't get into the housing market, still watches their savings fall behind inflation, the natural response is self-blame. I must not be working hard enough. I must be spending wrong somewhere. There must be something I'm missing that other disciplined people have figured out. The cruelty of systemic change is that it looks like personal failure when you're living through it. A 2023 Federal Reserve report on the economic well-being of U.S. households found that a meaningful share of adults, even those with stable employment, couldn't cover a $400 emergency expense without borrowing or selling something. That's not a story about individual irresponsibility. That's a story about wages, costs, and financial buffers that haven't kept pace with the economic environment people are actually living in. And then there's the inflation layer, which most people understand in theory, but don't fully account for in practice. When prices rise faster than your wage increases, you're effectively taking a pay cut you never agreed to. Over 5 or 10 years, even moderate inflation quietly hollows out purchasing power. The rent on a comparable apartment might be 30 or 40% higher than it was a decade ago. Groceries, healthcare, childcare, these essential categories have often risen faster than headline inflation figures suggest. And all the while, if your income has only grown in line with national averages, you've been slowly losing ground without the sensation of moving backward. The sensation is just that things feel harder than they used to. Not because you've changed, but because the numbers have. What nobody told most of us clearly enough is that in the modern economy, wealth increasingly builds through ownership, not just effort, through assets that compound, through equity in businesses, in property, in index funds that capture the growth of the broader economy. The people who got into the stock market decades ago and stayed, the people who bought real estate in growing cities, the people who started businesses, they built wealth through a different mechanism than their paychecks. And this isn't a secret conspiracy. The math is actually transparent. $1 invested in a broad market index fund 30 years ago has grown through crashes, recessions, crises, at a rate that no salary raise could replicate. Real estate in supply-constrained cities has appreciated in ways that fundamentally reset the wealth positions of those who own versus those who rent. The problem isn't that this information is hidden. It's that the cultural programming most of us received didn't make it central. We were taught to be good workers in an economy that was quietly becoming more favorable to good owners. And this is where the future starts to matter, because the divergence is likely to continue. Automation and artificial intelligence are beginning to compress the value of routine cognitive labor in ways that will take years to fully measure, but are already appearing in hiring patterns, wage stagnation in certain sectors, and the restructuring of entire industries. The jobs that remain well compensated are increasingly those requiring either rare creative judgment, deep relational intelligence, or technical specialization at the frontier of new systems. For everyone else, and this is the majority of people working today, the pressure is to do more for less, to remain adaptable in a market that rewards adaptability less than it used to, because the baseline competition is no longer just other workers. It's automation, offshore capability, and systems that don't sleep or ask for healthcare. None of this is written with despair in mind, but the honest version of understanding your financial life requires sitting with this reality, not softening it. So what does a more honest orientation look like? It starts with releasing the idea that income alone is a financial strategy. Income is fuel. What you do with the fuel determines the vehicle. And the vehicle, the actual mechanism through which wealth builds, has to include some form of ownership that grows independent of your labor hours. That looks different depending on where someone is starting. For some people, it's maxing out a 401k and letting market compounding do the heavy lifting over 20 or 30 years. For others, it's building equity in a primary residence in a location where values have room to grow. For others, it's a side business or ownership stake in something. The form matters less than the principle. That in the modern economy, passive asset growth is not a luxury supplement to income. It is the primary engine of long-term financial security for most people who achieve it. This also means that financial literacy isn't optional anymore in the way it might have been for previous generations. Your grandfather might have been able to hand the financial complexity off to a pension manager. You can't. That responsibility now sits with the individual, and navigating it, even imperfectly, even starting late, is meaningfully better than not navigating it at all. There's also something worth saying about the environment we make decisions in, because it's been engineered in ways that are worth understanding. The consumer economy is sophisticated and extraordinarily good at capturing income before it can become savings. Subscription services that aggregate to hundreds of dollars a month. Algorithmic feeds designed to surface desire constantly. Credit products that smooth short-term discomfort at the cost of long-term capacity. Lifestyle inflation that follows every raise before the raise can compound into anything. None of this is malicious in some grand sense. It's just the natural consequence of industries that profit from consumption optimizing their tools. But understanding that the environment is designed to accelerate spending is genuinely useful, not to make you paranoid, but to make you intentional. The people who build wealth in this environment aren't necessarily those who earn the most. They're often those who create friction between income and consumption, who route money into assets automatically before the consumer system can reach it. And here's the thing I keep coming back to, the idea that feels most important in all of this. The rules didn't change because someone chose to make things harder for ordinary people. They changed because the economy is a system, and systems evolve in response to technology, capital flows, demographics, and policy. The map that worked for one era simply doesn't describe the same terrain anymore. The emotional part of that, the grief almost, for a social contract that used to hold more firmly, is legitimate. It deserves acknowledgement, not just productivity advice. Because a lot of people are genuinely working hard and genuinely not getting ahead. And that's real. And it's not because of a character flaw. But the practical part requires updating the map. Not abandoning effort. Effort is still necessary. But understanding what effort alone can and cannot produce in this specific economic moment. Recognizing that income is the starting point, not the destination. That asset ownership, however modest, is the actual engine. That financial literacy is a survival skill in a way it never used to be. That the system isn't going to come back and restore the old bargain. The people who navigate this well, I've noticed, aren't necessarily the highest earners or the most aggressive investors. They're the ones who got honest about the rules early enough to operate within them clearly, who separated their self-worth from their income, who made the transition from thinking like a worker to thinking partly like an owner, even while they still work, who found a way to hold the psychological weight of an uncertain economic environment without being paralyzed by it. That clarity, not financial perfection, but honest, updated clarity, is what I think actually creates stability now. Not working harder within a framework that no longer delivers what it used to promise. You already know how to work hard. The question is whether the framework you're working hard inside of is the right one for the world you're actually living in. That's the conversation I think we need to keep having. Not as a source of anxiety, but as a source of orientation. Because the alternative is waking up years from now, still doing everything right by an old map, wondering why you haven't arrived. The economy has shifted. The tools to navigate it are available. And the first step, always, is just seeing things clearly. If this is the kind of conversation you want more of, the honest kind, the one that doesn't just tell you what to do, but actually tries to explain why things are the way they are, then stick around. There's a lot more where this came from. And if this video made you think of someone, a friend, a sibling, someone you know who's been working incredibly hard and quietly wondering why it doesn't feel like enough, share it with them. Sometimes just knowing the map is wrong is the thing that changes everything. I'll see you in the next one.